timing's got to be off because you can't see me start it, right? Hold on, I want to look over there. Let me see how it looks. I know. Oh, it was okay. It was as late as I thought it would be. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. I'm early, but I'm late. How funny is that? Not that funny. It is day 230. How amazing is that? Not that amazing, but kind of amazing. More amazing than that was funny. He so belongs there. His muted tones with the bright yellow. He so belongs there. Day 230, it's August 7th. We are on day number 2, a different mirror for young people. Let's get her started. We're on chapter 2, but we did read a great introduction. And I just can't get over that also, chapter 1. I should have highlighted more, but I didn't want to stop and highlight, right? I'm looking like that because I found my pen holders I made. One in my purse yesterday. I forgot that I made that beautiful leather one. And I keep thinking I should have my highlighters while I'm reading because there were a few more things. I try to be really conservative in my highlighting. Not many things I try to be conservative in, but in my highlighting, and a few other things. I got to close that door, and then I'm going to get my highlighters. But the most amazing thing in chapter 1 to me was how astounding the revelation could be that white people have to join the ranks of immigrants, and how realistic it should be, right? I mean, come on. Because you're better? I mean, that is kind of funny, isn't it? Okay, let me close that door and I'm going to go get my highlighter, and then we are going to start chapter number 2. And chapter number 2 is removing the savages. Oh, sometimes this stuff is a little bit more than heartbreaking, isn't it? And it's the reason why, honestly, people are disliking, gave me a thumbs down on the welfare system and psychology. It's because they are so angry at people just knowing the truth about the history of the United States. That's why they wanted to take all those books off the shelves, and they're claiming domestic terrorism. This kind of thing strikes up domestic terrorism. No, this kind of thing strikes up discussion and truth by people who aren't terrorists in general, or tyrants. Similar, in fact, new word. Okay, closing the door. I'm figuring you probably don't need any music. And going to get my pen case. Reading room doesn't often get to see some of the things I try and do to keep my spirits up besides just reading a book, but I am just really happy about this reading a book with you guys. I think it encourages reading, it encourages ideas, it encourages listening, all those kinds of things, contemplating. So, got my highlighter case that I made, and I actually brought over because I said I remembered, and I actually do. Those are kind of the fun things about making things on your own. Is rediscovering them in your purse. Look at that. I bought the pens just for this. They match, don't they? Looks good. Okay. Removing the savages. Now here we've got woodcut showing Indian walled town like those of the Powhatans near Jamestown. A woodcut would be something that would basically be an etching in wood. More than 1,000 years ago, I have that up, I'm going to take this down. More than 1,000 years ago, a meeting took place on the edge of North America. On the shore stood Bothak Native Americans who lived along what is now the eastern coast of Canada. From the sea came long ships filled with tall strangers who had pale skin, yellow hair, and blue eyes. The meeting ended in bloodshed. The strangers killed the Indians, all but one, who escaped in his small skin-covered boat. The strangers were Norsemen, Vikings from Greenland, who had originally come from Norway. Their leader was Thorvald Eriksson, the brother of Leif Erikson. On a voyage from Iceland around the year 1000, Leif had become the first European to reach North America. Thorvald and his men had followed Leif's direction in the new land where they had fought with the first people they met. I started doing a little bit of research on the Vikings, but most of it came from the history books that I was doing the research in to find out more and more about where did these Vikings come from. Because they do seem to be the ancestors of Europeans and white Europeans, and this thought process of white supremacy, hierarchy, roots of Nazism. Should I go on? And so I started doing it from this chapter. I forgot. Thorvald and his men had followed Leif's directions to the new land where they had fought with the first people they met. I think that was the point I just tried to make. It bared repeating. The original text. After Thorvald and the others made camp, they were attacked in their sleep by a band of Bothak. Thorvald died of his wounds, but that did not stop another group of Vikings from trying to settle in the place they called Vinland. Before long, though, the Vikings abandoned Vinland and returned to Greenland. They realized that although this was a good country, there would always be terror and trouble from the people who lived there. The Viking settlement in North America remains little more than a legend until 1960, when the remains of 1,000-year-old Viking buildings were found on the Canadian island of Newfoundland. What? 1960? Sounds like a film production to me. Producing a different history. I drink coffee and it's just an atrocious thing on the breath, along with soda and some other things. Almost 500 years later, another group of Europeans landed in North America. A Spanish expedition commanded by Christopher Columbus reached the islands of the Caribbean Sea. Columbus had planned to sail to Asia. He believed he had succeeded, but in reality, he had bumped into lands unknown to Europeans. This accident of history opened the way for Spain, Portugal, France, Holland, and England to send explorers, soldiers, and colonists to the continents that would be named the Americas. Now, maybe they didn't have the right or authority to send Columbus. Maybe that's just a big hoax that he didn't know where he was going. Maybe he did, right? Could be. Especially if he heard about the murders. Unlike the Vikings, these new strangers stayed. English over Irish. English colonies settled in Virginia in 1607 and Massachusetts in 1620. Just as had happened to the Vikings, the English found Native American peoples living in the new land they wanted to make home. In deciding how to deal with the Indians, the English used a method they had already practiced on another frontier. England's other frontier was Ireland. In both Ireland and America, the English were interacting with people they saw as other, different from themselves. And in both places, the English drew a line between civilization and savagery, a line that defined the English as civilized and the others as savage. In the late 16th century, shortly before the beginning of the English migrations to North America, England's Queen Elizabeth I encouraged some of her subjects to colonize Ireland, an island just west of England. Did she encourage them? What'd she say? You guys are so good. Let me give you a cookie. The Queen's advisors warned her that Ireland posed a threat. It was a Catholic nation, and more powerful Catholic countries, such as Spain or France, might use it as a base from which to attack England. Elizabeth's chosen soldiers included Sir Humphrey Gilbert and Sir Walter Raleigh. Like many English people, there were two Protestants who believed that the Irish Catholics were not just savages, but also pagans, or people who were not even Christians. To the English, the Irish were also completely lacking in good manners, good work habits, and a proper sense of private property. As a Catholic, I do believe people did not know we were Christians, which means you know nothing about Catholics. We believe in Jesus Christ. But Catholics also have a responsibility as far as trying to distinguish themselves from Christian religions, which it's like, oh, we're a Christian. Yeah, we believe in Jesus Christ, but Catholics came long before, so they have a hard time assimilating or associating themselves with any religion, Christian religion, other Christian religion, because they all came after Catholicism. Which, you know, for good reason. To the English, the Irish were also completely... All right, I already wrote that. The English colonizers in Ireland set up a two-level social structure. Oh, nice of you. Sounds empathic. Irish people were forbidden to wear English-style clothes, to carry English weapons on pain of death. No Irish could own property, hold public office, or serve on a jury. To reinforce this social separation, the English outlawed marriage between the Irish and their colonizers. The New World Order was to be one of English over Irish. So that's probably what they did. They said, I'm not allowed to hold property, that I can't own property. I can be property, but I can't own property. That's why they kicked me out of my house. The Irish also became targets of English violence, especially during the 9 Years' War, which began in 1594. Nothing but fear and force can teach duty and obedience to such rebellious people, the invaders insisted. The English burned Irish villages and crops, moving the people onto reservations. Whole families were slaughtered, but the English justified their actions by saying that the families provided support for the rebels. The invaders took the heads of their slain enemies as trophies. Gosh, who could equate Europeans with savages? I mean, come on. Who wouldn't take a head as a trophy? Is that, I mean, I keep referring to 13 monkeys and the viruses. Somebody took my head as a trophy. Faux sure. The invaders took the heads of their slain enemies as trophies. Sir Humphrey Gilbert ordered that the path of his tent on the battlefield should be lined with these trophies. Sir Humphrey Gilbert is a savage, so that anyone who came to see him must pass through a lane of heads. The high death toll of the Irish soon left the land almost empty, which to the English meant that it was vacant and ready for them to settle it. And the same awful acts that had been committed against the Irish would soon be committed against the Native Americans, often by English veterans of the war in Ireland. So I was mistaken when I thought that the English were used to gentlemen wars, like in World War I. English over Indians. That was Sir Humphrey Gilbert. You know, there's this pause here because it's like, what was that 9-year war about, right? Well, you know, what are wars usually about? They're usually about, you know, tyrants wanting to do tyrannical things. That's what they're about. So then it's like, all you're doing is feeding the demon. On the one hand. On the other hand, I mean, how far back does this imperialism go? And to what extent? I made a claim. Maybe France and England thought that the war that the United States was fighting in World War I was atrocious. That they wouldn't fight war that way. Or maybe they just had a target for their past atrocities, right? A victim for their past atrocities. This is really interesting. Okay, I don't think I read this. Okay. English over Indians. Even before the English began colonizing America, they viewed the Native American people as savage, even sometimes as less than human. They had heard about the Indians and some had seen them. Ever since Columbus gave 6 captive Indians to the Spanish king and queen after his voyage, along with some gold nuggets and parrots, sea captains who sailed to the Americas had been kidnapping Indians and carrying them across the ocean to be displayed as curiosities. You know, it's easy to say, are you kidding me? On the one hand. On the other hand, here is what most people would do. You have got to see this. I am not kidding. You have got to see this. This is as primitive as it gets. We're not going to get a better study of primitive people than what you know. You've got to see this. Well, you know, I don't know. It sounds like they're savages. How about you bring a few over here? No problemo. It's going to be a little difficult, right? Because, oh my gosh, you should have seen what they did to those people who landed in Jamestown. You don't think it was because they remembered you? Whites like ghost. Act like man, white like ghost. Ever since Columbus gave 6 captive Indians to the Spanish king and queen, in case you missed it, gave 6 captive Indians to the Spanish king and queen after his voyage. Now, again, I'm going to just hold on to that line for just a minute. And you just can't point the finger. I mean, I'm going to give you people as a gift. They represent something you've never seen before. We think they're savages. You should have seen what they did to the people of Jamestown. They have real fervor. They have real fight in them. If we were to train them a little bit, they'd likely make great soldiers, the best. It shouldn't be too hard. In 1605, Captain George Weymouth sailed along the coast of New England. He lured Abenaki Indians onto a ship and kidnapped 3 of them. And you could see that too. How hard would it be to lure Indians onto a ship? Or children? Another account boasted of having shipped back to England 5 savages, 2 canoes with all their bows and arrows. Look at this. Look at this. I mean, remember, we saw pictures in the books, but we've never, here it is in real life, like a picture of 1,000 years ago, right here in real life. And in 1611, an Indian was brought to England, and because he was tall, was showed up and down London for money as a monster. Those who displayed these Native Americans presented them as cruel, barbarous, and most treacherous. A writer named Richard Johnson described them in 1609 as wild and savage people who lived like herds of deer in the forest. When the first English colonizers arrived the Americans in the Americas, they found that the houses, clothes, and customs of Native American people reminded them of the wild Irish. From the start, the English viewed the Americas in terms of their experiences in the old world. Because they saw the Irish as savages, when they compared the Indians to the Irish, they were defining the Indians as savages too. Originally, planners in London expected the English colonists to civilize the savages by taking their Indian children from them and to train them up with gentleness, teach them our English language. In the 1606 contract with the Virginia Company that founded Jamestown, King James I supported a plan to teach Christianity to the Indians. Publicly for the colony said that the savage Indians could and should be educated, which would civilize them. What would happen to these ideas about American savages and the plans for civilizing them when Indians and English colonizers faced each other? Virginia aims to root out native people. At the Jamestown colony in Virginia, the English found themselves living in the ancestral homeland of about 14,000 Powhatan Indians. Powhatan were farmers who cultivated corn and lived in walled towns where the buildings were covered with tree bark and mats made of reeds. They cooked in ceramic pottery and wore baskets so fine that some of them could hold water. The first encounter between the English and Powhatan opened possibilities for friendship and cooperation. The original 120 colonizers were poorly prepared for survival in the American wilderness. They found conditions so harsh that one of them, John Smith, called their first year the starving time. At the end of it, only 38 remained, hanging on to the edge of survival and expecting every hour the fury of the savages, as Smith wrote. The Indians did come, but instead of fury, they brought food and rescued the starving strangers. Several hundred more settlers arrived from England. Again, they soon ran out of provisions. They had to eat dogs, cats, it says rates. That probably should be rats and mice. And some turned to cannibalism. The English tried to force the Powhatans to give them food by attacking them and burning their villages. Relations between the two peoples got worse after a new governor arrived with orders that the Indians must make yearly payments of corn and deerskin to the colonists who also work for them. These orders were brutally carried out. The English burned Indian villages and fields. One commander, George Percy, described killing Indian children by throwing them overboard and shooting out their brains in the water. The Indians came to doubt that the two peoples could live together in peace. They felt the newcomers were real savages. That's not what it says. They felt the newcomers were determined to take their land. Within a few years, the Jamestown colonists discovered a profitable new business, growing tobacco for export. To expand their tobacco farms, they wanted more land, especially land that the Powhatan had already cleared for their own farms. Tobacco, so they were too fucking lazy to even clear their own farms for their poisonous plants. Tobacco farming in turn drew more immigrants to the colony. In just 5 years, from 1618 to 1623, the population of Jamestown grew from 400 to 4,500. The Indians tried to drive out the intruders, killing some 300 colonists in an attack that Smith called a massacre by cruel beasts. These deaths made the English feel that they had a right to the land, that it had been bought with English blood. They decided to destroy them who sought to destroy us and take over the Indians' towns and farms. So just going and just taking their land and making them retaliate so they are seen as the aggressor. All we were doing is planting tobacco. I don't know what your problem is, you savage. But I want to know, honestly, I have to just stop to think about this search. Why tobacco? Like, it's not just why tobacco, but I thought that our tobacco, where we were really smoking as Europeans and Americans, came from our tobacco plants. So how did you know to come in here in Jamestown and plant tobacco? Right? You know what I'm saying? If it's not clear to you, what I'm saying is was there science behind this poisonous plant that you decided to plant on a brand new land? That's what I'm saying. The war against the Indians was vicious and treacherous. The English rode down to the Powhatan on horseback and chased them with dogs. They starved them by burning their food. A captain named William Tucker went to Powhatan village to make a peace treaty. After they signed the treaty, he persuaded the Indians to drink a toast. There's more drugging. Then served them poisoned wine, killing an estimated 200. Who's the savage? Tucker's soldiers brought home parts of their heads as trophy. By 1629, the goal of the English in Virginia was no longer to civilize or educate the Indians. It was to root out the Indians from being any longer a people. That's a quote, by the way. That's a quote. By 1629, that's a quote. And it's from, this is removing the savages. So here it says, woodcut showing Indian walled town like those in Powhatan, like those of the Powhatans near Jamestown. Think they were expecting the white man to come back? Those Norfolks? What? What? New England turns Indians into demons. John Smith had sailed north from Virginia in 1616 to explore the New England coast. The paradise of Massachusetts, he reported, was all planted with corn, groves, mulberries, savage gardens. That's what it says, savage gardens. Indeed, the Native Americans of the New England coast, the Wampanoag, Pequot, Narragansett, and others were farmers. They grew corn, beans, and pumpkins, and they planted groves of chestnut and hickory trees to support their communities with nuts. This way of life brought them into competition with the English pilgrims who founded a colony at Plymouth Rock in 1620, and then with the Puritans who soon settled on Massachusetts Bay. Now, one of the things about community, how they just know about the agriculture. So here the Europeans come in, colonizers come in, plant a poisonous crop, tobacco, to ruin the land without any thought or purpose. But listen, they grew corn, and this is what they're destroying. They grew corn, beans, and pumpkins. They planted groves of chestnut and hickory trees to supply their community with nuts. Wouldn't you just love to live there? That is community living, whereby the name and term communism came from community living. Why don't they want community living? Oh, because they were studying the tenements and there was too much immorality going on in community living. New England is hilly and rocky. Less than 20% of the area and the English colonies was good for farming, and the Indians already occupied the best areas. Why wouldn't they have? At first, because they're not stupid, at first the English managed to take over those lands without fighting because Indians had died in massive numbers from European diseases such as smallpox. William Bradford, who led the Pilgrims to Plymouth Rock, wrote in his diary, "For it pleased God to visit these Indians with a great sickness and such a mortality that 1,000 above 9 and a half hundred of them died, and many of them did rot above ground for want of burial." Oh, I'm sorry. Those were the non-savages speaking. Thanks for that. We should put a sign on them because sometimes it's hard to tell. That's all I'm saying. For it pleased God to visit these Indians with great sickness and such a mortality that 1,000 above 9 and a half hundred of them died, and many of them did rot above ground for want of burial. Well, thank God that the Pilgrims were there and the non-savage colonizers were there. The colonizers saw the Indian deaths as a sign that God had given the land to them. God was making room for the settlers. And don't think that smallpox, as we know from the blankets, wasn't there on purpose, because it was. So don't think they weren't carrying vials. That's probably why half the people were sick. They got drunk and dropped vials. They're like, ha ha ha, what if I went, ha ha ha. Come here, Jabbar. God was making room for the settlers. Indian death did mean life for the pilgrims who owed their survival to a store of corn they had found among Indian graves on Cape Cod. Later, many New England towns were founded on the very places where Indians had lived before the epidemics of disease wiped them out. As I've said, I do think that Trump is going over there and buying up land in order to maintain those burial sites just below the grounds of a golf course. As the English population grew, the settlers needed even more land to justify taking it from the Native Americans. Oh, silly you, why'd you have to justify it? Who had survived. The English argued that the Indians did not deserve the land because they were lazy and did not work as hard as the English did after they took all their farmland. Ignoring the evidence that Indians had been farmers in New England, well, you know, those are the typical scientists. The English compared the Indians to foxes and wild beasts who did nothing but run over grass. And this is the beginning of our media propaganda. Thank God we have new rules and regulations, you know, from all of our lessons over the past 500 years or so. Over the years, the growth of the English settlements led to wars. During the Pequot War of 1637, the English and their Indian allies killed some 700 Pequot, burning many of them, including women and children, in their forts. Nearly 40 years later, the Indians struck back at the colonists in King Philip's War, which nearly succeeded in driving the English out of New England. Reinforced troops from England, however, the settlers overcame the Indians, killing and enslaving thousands. Religious leaders led the way in justifying violence against the Native Americans. Ministers talked of the war against the Indians as a battle between God and the devil. And so this I talked about in one of my classes about how the first people to come in, and I looked at AI at this, the first people to come in were always the missionaries. And so here they were fervent and believers in their mission to teach people about Christ. But they had little say in the follow-up of what is basically producers or corporate America, industrialization, big ag, eventually to come later on after little ag started everything, that kind of thing. Cotton Mather called the Indians miserable savages who worship the devil. The Puritan colonists in Massachusetts were strict Protestants who believed in witchcraft. They claimed that some of the colonists whom they accused of witchcraft had been encouraged by demons in the form of Indians. Not everyone in the English settlements saw the Native Americans as completely demons or animals. Mary Rowlandson had been captured by the Narragansett during King Philip's War. She lived with them for 11 weeks. In 1682, after she had returned to white society, she published a book about her experiences with the Indians. Rowlandson's story echoed many English stereotypes of the Indians as barbarous creatures, merciless and cruel, and hellhounds. At the same time, some parts of her story challenged these negative images. Indians had treated her and her 6-year-old daughter with kindness and generosity, she reported. They were also generous with each other, she wrote. I did not see all the time I was among them one man, woman, or child die with hunger. By recognizing the humanity of the Indians, Rowlandson's story offered a chance for the English to understand or even share the feelings of the people whose land they were taking. But the English did not pursue this chance. Instead, they continued their relentless conquest of the North American continent. And then here is a narrative of the captivity, suffering, and removes of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson, who was taken prisoner by Indians. Well, it's very difficult to read that. But, you know, maybe you can get it and blow it up. Hold on. What? You want some better lighting? How's that? Stolen lands and a world turned upside down. During the 18th century, the English colonies in North America grew larger in population and developed thriving economies. Eventually, they fought for independence, and after they had won it, they joined to form the United States of America. Cities and towns expanded, settlers moved westward, and the new nation seemed set on a path of prosperity and progress. Progress for white Americans, however, led to poverty for Native Americans. In 1789, the Mohegan tribe sent a message to the government of Connecticut, lamenting their hardships. "The times have turned everything upside down," said the message. Once the Mohegan had had plenty of game, fish, and crops, and no need to fight over land. But alas, it is not so now. The Indians had begun to live like white people, with horses and cattle and fenced lots. But there was no longer enough for all, and poor widows and orphans must be pushed one side, and there they must set a-crying, starving, and die. Ever since the arrival of the English, the Indians' story had been one of stolen lands, sickness, starvation, suffering, and sadness. This picture there that you saw was the title page of the 1773 edition of Mary Rowlandson's book about her time as an Indian captive. So I don't know, you might be able to get your hands on that. Probably. But those were the things that people who are, you know, all for Civil War and Confederacy were banning. These are the books that they were banning. After the War of Independence and the founding of the new nation of the United States, the Native Americans wondered what the future would hold for them. Another person who asked this question was one of the founding fathers, a lawyer, Virginia planter, and author of the Declaration of Independence. In 1781, as governor of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson had told the Kaskaskia tribe that whites and Indians were both Americans born in the same land, and that he hoped the two peoples would long continue to smoke in friendship together. Other statements, however, revealed that Jefferson held a very different view. In 1776, when the colonists began their War of Independence, Jefferson had supported removing, even destroying hostile Indians. Nothing will reduce those wretches so soon as pushing the war into the heart of their country, he wrote to a friend, but I would not stop there. We would never cease pursuing them with war while one remained on the face of the earth. In Jefferson's view, Indians had to be either civilized, in other words, made to act like white people, or exterminated. Later, as President Jefferson told the Cherokee people, I shall rejoice to see the day when the red man, our neighbors, become truly one people with us, enjoying all the rights and privileges we do, and living in peace and plenty as we do. But in order to do that, Jefferson insisted Native Americans must give up their customs, beliefs, and traditional ways of life. They must build fences, learn arithmetic, and live like whites. Jefferson also promised the Indians that they could keep their own lands. Your lands are your own. Your right to them shall never be violated by us. They are yours to keep or sell as you please. Yet Jefferson worked to make it harder for Indians to refuse to sell land to the whites. One way was to discourage Indians from hunting and make them take up farming. If they did not need the forest for hunting, Jefferson claimed they would be more willing to sell them to whites. Another plan was to build more trading posts to sell white manufactured goods to the Indians on credit. This would destroy the Indians financially. When the Indians found themselves in debt, they would have no choice but to hand over their land. When the Indians found themselves in debt, they would have no... All right, for Jefferson, the Indians could not be allowed to remain within society as Indians. In the 17th century, New Englanders had celebrated the disappearance of wolves and bears from their settlements. In 1824, the year he died, Jefferson wrote a letter that revealed his vision of America's future. He looked forward to the day when wild beasts and the savages who lived like them would be gone from the land and the advance of civilization would be complete. A settler girl becomes a Seneca. Some of America's first adventure tales were captivity narratives like Mary Rowlandson's. These were the stories of white colonists who had been captured by Native Americans. Captives who escaped or were released would return to white society and write or talk about their experiences. Not all captives chose to return, however. Mary Jeminson is one of those who remained with the Native Americans. Mary was 15 years old when, sometime between 1755 and 1758, her family was captured by a band of Shawnee Indians and French soldiers. At the time, frontier wars in the American colonies pitted the English against the French and their Indian allies. So it was French and Indians against the English. Like other settlers, they were taken by the enemy. The Shawnees killed Mary's parents and siblings, but gave Mary to members of the Seneca tribe who adopted her as a replacement for a young man who had been killed in the fighting. During my adoption, Mary recalled years later, I sat motionless, nearly terrified to death at the appearance and actions of the company, expecting every moment to feel their vengeance and suffer death on the spot. I was, however, happily disappointed when at the close of the ceremony, the company retired and my Indian sisters went about employing every means for my consolation and comfort. She added, I was very fortunate in falling into their hands, for they were kind, good-natured women, peaceable and mild in their dispositions, temperate and decent in their habits, and very tender and gentle toward me. Mary married a Delaware Indian. They had a son, but Mary's husband died while the family was moving to a new home in New York State. Later, Mary married a Seneca man, and they had 6 children together. They survived the American Revolution, although they sided with the British in that conflict, and Mary lived with the Seneca until her death at nearly 90. Mary's story is known to us because when she was an old woman, she told it to a minister, James E. Seaver, who published it in 1824. Historians think a narrative of the life of Mrs. Mary Jeminson is fairly accurate. Like the story of Mary Rowlandson more than a century earlier, Mary Jeminson's story shows that in the clash between whites and Native Americans, there was a right and wrong, and also gentleness and violence on both sides. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. We have just completed chapter 2. These chapters are nice and long, so we'll see, but it's a lengthy book. We've got a lot of stories, and I hate to rush the stories because just like in the chapter 1, where to me the main thesis was that white people are going to be just like the immigrants, there's a thesis you can pull out of these chapters and really discuss, and no reason to rush through to chapter 3 when there's enough to discuss there about the treatment of Native Americans. And also, I would likely think a discussion on your feelings about Thomas Jefferson. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. Thanks so much for joining me here in the reading room, where we are reading A Different Mirror for Young People. And this is A History of Multicultural America. One of those books that did get banned from some of the shelves because they felt that the truth was just too much for Americans and that it would inspire domestic terrorism, when after all they had already been taken care of already. Thanks for listening and watching here in the classroom. We have completed day 230. It is August 7th, and we are always here 3 days on, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays till right about now, right about 1 o'clock, maybe a little bit after, but that's about when we finish up for 3 days on, and then we have some fun with what we learned. I hope I really did give gamers a little bit of a bone to chew on in our last hour. Thanks so much for being here in the reading room. I will see you after our 4 days off. Thanks for joining me.